Do you? Yeah, we'll be fine.
Yeah. It was 1975. I had just gotten tenure at Oakland University, which almost made it through the second round last night. Irrelevant. I was on my first sabbatical leave at a lab in Syracuse, New York. My marriage was on the rocks. My wife and 3 children stayed behind in Pontiac, Michigan. I got a room in a boarding house and spent my evenings at a local bar or reading voluminously 57 books that year. One of them was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert PIrsig. His Metaphysics of Quality meshed beautifully with a breakthrough idea that I was forming during that sabbatical from my work in systems theory. I came to believe that the subject, object, things are slightly off there, that's okay. The subject, object, duality or dichotomy that had troubled Western culture for so long could be solved if we realized that there was a deeper reality that I called by the portmanteau Actware. Actware was the source of everything, of the action of the world of objects out there and the awareness by me, the subject. Without awareness, there are no objects, nor can you say anything about them. I'm not saying that objects don't exist. It's just that they're not objects until they're brought out of the undifferentiated background actware by your act of awareness. No awareness, no objects. If you remain loyal to that concept, it's amazing how many conundrums of philosophy and religion and even science just simply evaporate. Actware created everything, and therefore it sounded similar to PIrsig's quality. My route to Actware was through systems theory. PIrsig's route to quality was through philosophy, and he developed his ideas much further than I did. I was 37 years old, the most creative year of my life. I was ecstatic. I marched around my rental chanting. Pop goes the illusion, bang goes the lie. There is no secret and there is no I. Pop goes the illusion, bang goes the lie. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, was published a year earlier. It was a sensation. It has sold more than 5 million copies. The 1960s had been a time of hippie enthusiasm for flowers and grass and rejection of technology. PIrsig believed that the root of this chasm between romantic and rational thinking was in the Greek culture of Socrates, Plato, and especially Aristotle. He rejected it all as subsidiary to a more fundamental and undefinable thing, which he called quality. The book integrates these philosophic thoughts with an actual road trip, which he took on a motorcycle in 1968 with his 12-year-old son, Chris, on the seat behind him. By the end of the book, several dichotomies have a resolution between subject and object, between thinking and feeling, between a romantic and rational view of life, between science and art, and even more importantly, the chasm between his pre-electroshock treatment self, whom he names Phaedrus, and his current, more mellow self, the narrator of the book. And finally, because of that, the chasm between his son, Chris, and he. Is the book fictional or factual? Let's call it lightly fictionalized autobiography. The trip is real, from Minneapolis to San Francisco. The motorcycle's real. It's even now in the Smithsonian Institute. His friends who accompany him, John and Sylvia, are real. John's embrace of hippie romance with nature and his rejection of technology which serves as PIrsig's starting point. That's real. But most readers will probably be surprised to learn that Phaedrus is a rhetorical device. Phaedrus is just the name he gives to his pre-shocked self, an alter ego whom the narrator claims to scarcely know. There's a wall between Phaedrus and the narrator of the book, which the narrator fears to breach, but finally does breach in this trip. No. In reality, PIrsig knew quite well what Phaedrus had gone through, at least by 1964 when he began writing Zim. Like an archaeologist, PIrsig had spent several years digging through these conflicted layers of his psyche and developing his philosophy, even though it sounds like it all happened on the trip. In fact, the early drafts of Zim did not even have a character named Phaedrus. PIrsig put Phaedrus in later drafts to give a personality to the thoughts and experiences that the narrator had gone through as he slid down the slippery slope of insanity. Who was this unknown author? Well, he was born at 28 in Minneapolis, graduated high school at age 14 with a measured IQ of 170, entered Minnesota as a biochem student. He flunked out because he was more interested in the nature of hypotheses than he was in biochem. So he joined the Army, went to Korea, where he had his first contact with Zen, which remained a commitment for his whole life, which led him also then to go to India, where he studied philosophy at Benares Hindu University. So he came back, married Nancy, had 2 sons, Chris and Ted, got a master's degree in journalism, joined the faculty of Montana State teaching rhetoric, entered a PhD program at the University of Chicago, which was part of the reason that he had a mental breakdown and diagnosed schizophrenic. He was institutionalized and given electroconvulsive shock treatment. In '64, he was released as a calmer, more ordinary 36-year-old who had learned how to fit in. In the mid-'60s, he supported himself as a technical writer, took his trip in '68, started writing Zim for the next 4 years. After 2 years, he threw away his first draft, started again, knew he was now on the right track. Although it was declined by 100. This is for Mason. It was declined by 121 publishers, but finally accepted by William Morris and published in '74. Parenthetically, 5 years later, his son Chris was stabbed to death outside the San Francisco Zen Center. His only other book was Lila, published in '91, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and he died in 2017, fairly recently, at the age of 88 in Maine, where he had spent the last 32 years of his life, much of it sailing. The rest of my talk will be excerpts from his book, which he divides into 4 parts. At the beginning of the book is this epigraph. And what is good, Phaedrus? And what is not good? Need we ask anyone to tell us these things? But that's a foil for the whole book. People may know what is good, but they can't define it. You can just give examples. Is Moby Dick good? The Greeks thought you had to start out by defining your terms so that you could go on to discuss them dialectically. Now, interspersed in the travelogue, this whole story, PIrsig gives Chautauquas, which is a 19th century word for educational talks. It started at Chautauqua, New York in the 1800s. PIrsig's, some of his are personal history, and some are his philosophic views and their development. So I'm going to give you an excerpt from the first one. The 4 travelers have been sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories. And so the narrator says, the scientific point of view has wiped out every other view to a point where they all seem primitive. Modern man has his ghosts and spirits too, you know. The laws of physics and of logic, the number system, the principle of algebraic substitution. These are ghosts. We just believe in them so thoroughly that they seem real. For example, it seems completely natural to presume that gravitation and the law of gravitation existed before Isaac Newton. No. The law of gravity exists nowhere except in people's heads. It's a ghost. Do we believe that the disembodied words of Sir Isaac Newton were sitting there in the middle of nowhere billions of years before he was born, and that magically he discovered these words? That, John, he says, is ridiculous. And then he goes on. These ideas, the things I was saying about science and ghosts, are stolen from him. I first discovered him by inference from a strange series of events many years ago. At a party, he falls asleep and awakens in a psychiatric hospital where he is told that a new personality has been created by 28 sessions of annihilation ECS. Phaedrus is almost completely gone, a few wisps of memory, and the new person created. Okay, that's pretty heavy. Let's take a break. Time for a chautauqua. So, he says in one of these little chautauquas, the romantic mode is primarily inspirational, imaginative, creative, intuitive. Feelings rather than facts. Although motorcycle riding is romantic, motorcycle maintenance is purely classic. Here's an example. Here's how. The cycle's not running, you start with a hypothesis. Maybe it's electrical. Then you ask a hierarchical set of questions. Is it an electrical problem? Yes or no? If yes, is it a spark plug? If no, etc. That's entirely an example of rationality. But the hypothesis is not. You can't deduce that. Where did that hypothesis that it might be electrical come from? That process is most mysterious and outside of rationality. So he becomes fascinated with this question, where do hypotheses come from? So he studies the Scottish philosopher David Hume, an empiricist, then the German Immanuel Kant, a rationalist, then Einstein, a scientist, and very importantly, the French mathematician Henri Poincaré, who described precisely his path to his hypotheses, his new mathematical ideas. Still no acceptable answer from Phaedrus. The Eastern religions are different. So he travels to India, and he studies Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism. Their verbalized statements about reality are never assumed to be reality itself. In all the Oriental religions, everything you think you are, the subject, and everything you think you perceive, the object, are undivided. To realize fully this lack of division is to become enlightened. He likes that. But does that mean the outer world is just an illusion or unimportant? One day in the Hindu classroom, the professor of philosophy was blithely expounding on the illusory nature of the world for what seemed like the 50th time, and Phaedrus raised his hand and asked coldly if the atomic bombs that had dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were illusory. The professor smiled and said yes. Phaedrus left the classroom, left India, left Oriental philosophy, and gave up his search for the source of hypotheses. He returned to his Midwest, married, fathered 2 children, picked up a practical degree in journalism, worked as a journalist, then joined the faculty of Montana State. Then by chance, Sarah, a colleague, says with a sing-song cadence, "I hope you're teaching quality to your students." Bingo! That was the moment it all started. What was quality? Within a matter of a few months, growing so fast you could almost see it grow, came an enormous, intricate, highly structured mass of thought. The way a supersaturated solution suddenly crystallizes. Quality is mysterious, like a hypothesis is mysterious. Did the hypothesis originate in the outside world or in the scientist's mind? The philosophers couldn't decide. And quality, is it inherent in a painting or a book? Or is it just a subjective judgment in the mind of the critic? Critics couldn't decide. It would help if you could define quality. That was Aristotle's aspiration. But it's hard to define. You just know it when you see it. Take an example. Taylor Swift's songs seem to be good. Or is that just my opinion? Most people will agree that Taylor Swift songs are better than, say, Debbie Boone's awful You Light Up My Life. Sorry if I stepped on any toes. Most people would agree that Moby Dick is better than, well, the Da Vinci Code. Most people would agree that Mona Lisa is better than Nava's Nightmare of Battle, which he published, I think, in the 70s. But where is that judgment coming from? If it's in the objects, then why is there any disagreement? And if it's in the subject, the mind of the critic, then there's no reason to say one's better than another. It's all just subjective. Now some of you may be thinking this is sort of obvious. If it's not in the subject and it's not in the object, it must be in their relationship. But there's no place in Socratic thinking for this third thing. That's Pirsig's main point, what his narrator goes on in part 4 to prove. Now, I personally don't like the term quality. It carries baggage. That baggage is that we think of quality as a trait of objects. So let me tell you right now, you can just as use the word God. But that has baggage too. The old white-haired man in the sky. At least my term Actware is new and baggageless. As is Tao. Well, it's not new, but it's baggageless. Phaedrus realized that the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu is saying the same thing. And he tries substituting quality for Tao. The quality that can be defined is not the absolute quality. Looked at, but cannot be seen. Listened to, but cannot be heard. And now I can say the same thing about God. The God that can be defined is not the absolute God. Looked at but cannot be seen. Listened to but cannot be heard. The God that can be described is not the absolute God. Quality is not a third object, but rather the relationship of the two with each other. Quality is not a thing, it's an event. It's the event at which the subject becomes aware of the object, says Pirsig. But that's what I also said about Actware. Phaedrus looks for an academic program to explore this new realization. He joins the University of Chicago's interdisciplinary program in analysis of ideas and study of methods. This famous program created the 54-volume Great Books of the Western World. Those folks believed that Aristotle was the pinnacle of human thought and the center of this program. The next 57 pages of the book are all about his experience in that program, but they can be summed up by this one paragraph. Rhetoric is an art, Aristotle began, because it can be reduced to a rational system of order. That just left Phaedrus aghast. To get hit right off straight in the face with an asshole statement like that. It really shook him. Now, from me, I'm just saying, do you realize what Aristotle is saying? If even something as right brain as art, then everything, love, nature, awe, everything can be reduced to a rational system of order. Rationality trumps everything. The more he studied, the more convinced Phaedrus became that no one had yet told the damage to this world that had resulted from our unconscious acceptance of their thought. Here's a clip of Pirsig talking about this. This is from '74, a little blurry, but the year he published. This was given the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Thank you.
The ultimate quality, the quality which Phaedrus saw in the end is a quality which cannot be apprehended by rational means. No proofs are possible. No proofs can be given. The ultimate proof, the one which is given in the 4,000 euro Upanishad, is he who knows this has no further doubt. It's there, and to subject it to rational proofs is to place the proofs in a higher position than quality itself. And it's argued that this is what was done by the Socratics, you see. They said to Gorgias, now you talk about the good. Please tell me about the good. Put it in rational language so that I can subject it to logical proofs. And in so doing, they elevated the dialectic, the proofs, and they subordinated quality, or they subordinated the good, which is an equivalent term, or the dharma, and all of a sudden we have a world in which reason dominates what's good, rather than what's good dominates reason.
Dichotomy is at the heart of it. Until the Socratics, there was no such thing as mind and matter. Subject and object, form and substance. These divisions are just dialectical inventions that came along later. If you doubt that, and you probably do, consider Julian Jaynes' 1975 book, The Origin of Consciousness and Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. He says that the word mind isn't even found in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And that's because Greeks at that time didn't have a sense of interiority, of consciousness. They were conscious, of course, but they didn't know it because they weren't self-conscious. The philosophy is done. There are many pages on practical applications of this philosophy to everyday life, which I'll skip to get to the personal finale. He's been having this frequent dream of being on the other side of a glass door from his family, with Chris beckoning him to open it, but a shadowy figure is standing on this side. Why don't you come out of the shadows? What do you really look like? What is it you're afraid of? I brace myself and then lunge. Dad! He's crying, sobbing now. Stop, Dad. Wake up, Dad. I'm all right. It was just a nightmare. You showed me you were going to kill me. It's emotional. No, not you. The person in the dream. Did you see his face? Yes, it was my own face. The dreamer isn't me at all. It's Phaedrus. He's waking up. He's trying to kill me. I'm the evil figure in the shadows. I always knew you'd come back. Well, in this Chautauqua, there's been more than a touch of hypocrisy. Advice is given again and again to eliminate the subject-object duality, when the biggest duality of all, duality between me and him, remains unfaced. A mind divided against itself. Everything is all right now, Chris. That's not my voice. I haven't forgotten you. Chris's rocking stops. We'll be together now. It has all come together. Chris's face is open in a way I've never seen it before. Are you really insane? No. Chris's eyes sparkle. I knew what he says. For God's sake, relieve him of his burden. Be one person again. We've won it. It's going to get better now. You can sort of tell these things.